Hi, and welcome to a new video. This video deals with a little bit of a different topic than my usual videos, but truth be told, I didn't really have any other place to put this video, so it's living on this channel right now. This video is about making or building a wooden kookbox surfboard. Yeah, you heard right. This is not a watchmaking video, although I mostly do watchmaking videos, but this video is about woodwork for once. Years ago, I came across this very early type of hollow wooden surfboard, which is called a toothpick kookbox. There's a man who in the 30s and 40s developed many of the early surfboards. His name was Tom Blake. And as a person who always aspired to be a surfer, but frankly was born in the wrong location, I still thought that I could make a surfboard. And the way these type of surfboards are constructed seemed pretty much straightforward to me, so I thought I could replicate that and sort of adapt the building process to build a surfboard for myself and for my needs. So this surfboard is a little bit shorter and has a little bit more volume than a ordinary Tom Blake toothpick kookbox would have, but this is sort of my adopted version. A huge inspiration for building this surfboard was a man named Nole Cossart. He has a pretty rad video about him on YouTube. The video is called Mr. Kookbox, and it sort of describes his journey building these Tom Blake inspired surfboards, who are, by the way, finless. So these are early surfboards who don't have fins or very tiny fins. And he sort of tries to develop them and builds them for himself and enjoys them surfing. And this video was sort of a big inspiration, and his Instagram is also a very big inspiration for me in building these types of surfboards. I'm not a professional woodworker, so there are many things that could be improved on, from materials to working processes to machines that I use. I'm pretty sure that anyone who has a woodworking workshop or has more experience can build a better board, and a board that is more durable than the thing that I built. But, this is my first experiment in building a board. The first step for me was decide on what kind of board I wanted to build, and obviously, because I set out to build a toothpick kookbox, I could go from there in terms of what material I needed. I decided to do the side walls and the top and bottom layers in plywood, and in between that I put ribs of laminated plywood who are about a centimeter thick to give the board enough stability. I then started with building the front and aft piece of this board so that I basically could form the shape of this board first to get an idea of where to position the widest rib. And these three elements, the aft part, the front part, and the widest middle rib, are basically the three things that define the shape of the board. After that, I trimmed the side walls down to give the board the shape that it should later take on, and then glue the side walls onto the front and aft piece, but not gluing in the middle section, because the middle section I moved around up and down within the surfboard to sort of define where the widest point of the surfboard should be. And the surfboard is not relatively wide because it's orientated on my shoulders so that I can comfortably paddle, so it's not that wide. After I had sort of defined the basic outline of the board, I fabricated all of the ribs. I basically just set different distances from the main rib from where I started out, and then took the measurements directly from the board, which was on the floor, and then fabricated the ribs according to that. The ribs were drilled out to save some weight and also allow air circulation within the board, so that if water should ever get into the board, air movement had a chance to, take the moisture out eventually. The front and the rear of the board were not really exactly built. I did not really honestly make a plan. I sort of started with the front and aft piece and then worked my way, looking at pictures and basically working to a feeling of what I thought was right and wrong. This was more like an experiment than really professionally trying to build a board. So I had to put a little bit of wood putty in it. So the top side of the board has no curvature whatsoever, and that allowed me to glue the board, when it had all the ribs in it, upside down on that top side board and not end up with a sort of twisted board, because for example, I do not have the number of clamps. On a second board that I later had, I not only glued the top and bottom board to the side walls, but I also screwed it down to reinforce that. That really small surface would probably be the first that if it gets weak or if there's too much flex in the board that they would break up and then the board would pretty quickly start to leak. But for all the time that I had this board, I never had that problem. Then I could, glue on the bottom side of the board. I had also both sheets of plywood roughly to size so that I did not have too much overhang, because this basically was wood that I had to take down or chisel down basically to the dimensions of the sideboards. I fabricated a valve that could be unscrewed and screwed down with a rubber gasket, so that because of the big volume of air that's in the board, that air, if that expanded and contracted, needed somewhere to go. And if the board is stored and it's subject to temperature changes, I needed that air to go somewhere and also take out any moisture that had built up within the board. So that little valve that you can see here, that can screw down and lock down and then seals the board. If the board is stored, it can be completely removed. I fixed in a leash plug at the end with a little bit of rope that I could attach a leash to. And then after the sides were sanded down, I was left with the final shape of the board, and then put a couple of stickers on. And I must say it is a pretty chunky board. It's somewhere in between a pretty short paddle board and a toothpick. The board was then varnished to seal it. If I would do this work again, I would probably not varnish the board, but epoxy it or put fiberglass on it, simply because it also adds extra structure and you don't have to do as many layers as you have to do with varnish to, get a good surface finish. And that's the board. Here it is. Unfortunately, I don't really have video or pictures of the board in the water because we really rarely have the opportunity to go surf, and if we do, pretty much everyone is in the water and no one is taking photographs, and we try to make the best of it. The board seems to be a little bit front heavy, but the way this board works is that if you're on it, sort of the back of the board sinks into the water and that then acts as a fin. I was really, while I was building the board, I was not really trusting that, but also did not really install a fin or anything. And when I got into the water with that board for the first time, I was really surprised not only how fast this board is paddling, but also how stable in terms of a direction it is. And this is not even a long board. This is a pretty short board. I think this board is like 220 centimeters. What's that? 6'7", 6'8". That board had more than enough buoyancy for me and more than enough buoyancy to paddle into really slow waves. A funny thing is that even, bigger ships going by who, produce a small wake wave, even that wave, you feel that the board wants to go into that wave. So that is a really funny thing to feel. And I really do want to build an improved version of a toothpick again, because I think it's ultimately a very interesting type of board. I'm not ever going to be like a hardcore surfer, ever. I'm always going to stay a kook. Because, it's just not my focus. But I love building this thing. I think it looks super rad, super cool. And if I do get a chance once or twice a year to surf it, I'm pretty happy with that.